Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrell, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by ACE, the HR Exam, and Upskill HR. These are two courses that we offer for HR certification prep and recertification for HR leaders. You can learn more about these courses at Workology.com. Check them out. This podcast is part of a new series that I'm calling HR Basics. It's where we cover common yet complicated topics within the world of human resources. And for the HR Basics series, I am tapping into the HR consultant brain trust. They're going to help guide us into these very complex areas within the field of HR. Every episode of the HR Basics series, we are talking to a different consultant who supports multiple clients and customers. They provide consulting, advising, and other support services for all businesses of all sizes and industries. In this episode that you're listening to now, we are tackling the nuances and intricacies of organizational growth. When a company is growing rapidly, the role of HR becomes increasingly complex, demanding a mastery of skills that drive sustainable growth and competitive advantages. It is not just about understanding the market, it's about predicting it, shaping it, and capitalizing on it. In order to manage growing pains in a small or a large organization, the HR leader must be equipped with an analytical mind, a creative idea, and agility to pivot to different strategies in response to the ever-shifting market conditions. Now, before I introduce our guest today, I do want to hear from you. Please comment podcast on the pin post on my Instagram. It's at Workology Blog. Ask questions, leave comments, and make suggestions for future guests. I want to hear from you. Before I introduce our guest for today, the first portion of this podcast here on Workology as part of the Workology Podcast is available to you. The extended version, meaning the full version of this podcast episode, which is an hour in its entirety, is available exclusively to our Upskill HR members. You can head on over to upskillhr.com and subscribe to our recertification and professional development learning platform for the entire interview, because it is a good and juicy one. Today's guest is Claudio Diaz, Chief People Officer and Consultant. With 2 decades of executive experience in human resources, Claudio is bilingual. He's a bilingual CHRO who drives organizational growth through sustainability and accountability systems. His 17 years at Disney paved a foundation for innovating inclusivity, leading to OnCon's global recognition as a top 10 HR professional for Claudio's impact and leadership in the field. He partners with executive teams and boards to align human capital strategy and business strategy and culture. He oversees all aspects of HR and human capital, including M&A, performance optimization, culture revitalization, change facilitation, Six Sigma, executive coaching, and leadership development. Claudio also leverages his accounting background to audit cultural integrity and identify key areas to improve execution, delight customers, and engage employees at every level within the organization. Claudio, I'm so delighted to welcome you back to the Workology Podcast.
Thank you, Jess. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
So let's talk a little bit about your background. What led you to HR? Because you have a pretty eclectic background as an accountant. I don't always see CHROs from the accounting side. Maybe we need more of them. And then just the work that you're doing as an executive coach and as an HR consultant.
Well, sure. Be glad to, but just don't let me get too winded on my past. So I believe the entire foundation for what I do now, really in HR consulting, began during my 17 years at Disney. And I wasn't even a consultant yet. One of my first roles as a trainer in finance, for instance, I really helped my clients, although internal clients, grow And that was leaders as well as my peers. In fact, let me see if I get this straight. My boss's boss's boss, was sent to open Disneyland Paris. And during those 9 months, while the proverbial cat was away, the mice began to play. And I don't mean Mickey Mouse, but everyone else in the 5 departments where I was a trainer. And I have to tell you, their playing wasn't always very positive. And I saw this, and upon Jim's return, I set up a 1-hour meeting to kind of basically share a best practice on how we can assess and then improve engagement amongst people who were really backbiting each other. And that word engagement wasn't around yet, but I knew that this guy named Jack Welch, who the heck is he, right, was doing this at GE, and we could do it as well. So my 1-hour meeting with Jim turned into 7 hours of counseling him over several days on what we could do. And it's because of that experience that I was then selected on a business process reengineering task force, or BPR. I don't know if any of your listeners know Michael Hammer, but for those Michael Hammer fans out there, I was one of 7 cast members selected from a pool of about 86,000 at that time. And so it was a real pleasure for me. I was meeting weekly with the top 12 executives at Disney World, our team was, and recommending steps that we could take so that we could more effectively engage all cast members, not just what I did for Jim. So you can imagine the relationships I made in those weekly Friday morning meetings. And it's from those connections that I was then selected to be on the Disney Traditions orientation team. And let me back up a little bit. Traditions is known worldwide for really preparing all new cast members at Disney, no matter what their role. And we try to help them creatively explore how to make magic in their Disney career. And it's such a coveted role, training Traditions, that over 500 cast members apply every single year. I don't know what the numbers are now, but it was about 500 back then. And there are only 30 open slots. I was very fortunate and blessed to be selected, and really took it quite as an honor. And I'll tell you, Jess, I put my heart and soul in and all my passions into that role, so much that I was then selected as a leader on that team, that leadership team, the very next year. And that was the first time I supported direct reports in an HR role. And I really vowed to kind of advise them as individuals just as much as I did Disney World's executives and as a group. And it sort of became known that, without bragging too much, sorry about that, but if Claudio was your leader, you were not only going to get glowing feedback, you were also going to get growing feedback. And so using everything I learned in all of those roles, my last role at Disney was a business programs consultant for Disney Institute's guests. And the difference between Disney University and Disney Institute, some of your listeners may already know, was that my audience at DU was internal cast members, while at DI, they were external business guests, just such as yourself, your team, right? And you go out there and you want to know how to run your businesses the Disney way. So I loved that consultancy role. And for the first 6 months at DI, I was basically a glorified trainer. And it wasn't until Mark David Jones, Richard Parks, Gwen Birch, I hope they're all listening at one point or another to your podcast, and several others took me under their wing as co-facilitators, because we would teach as teams. And they taught me the subtle difference between training and consulting. So using very similar content, I basically shifted from delivering prepared information to creating customized solution. Same content, but a completely different context. In fact, I would call the heads of those teams that would come over 30 days before they arrived and said, hey, where's your pain point? And it's really from there on that I never stopped consulting on an HR perspective. I feel that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I hope it could give you an idea of how I started the consulting bug in my life.
I love it. And I think that it's such a good thing to begin our conversation on as HR leaders are thinking about how they can move from being an HR practitioner to a business partner supporting the organization. Such a great introduction into the story behind consulting, like your point of view. Let's talk more about the approach when you're working with business leaders. I'm sure that's evolved since your Disney days.
It definitely has. We all grow and get better at what we do, right? In fact, I would say that the evolution of the actions you just heard in my prior response might actually typify what the growth was like. So I went from helping train others to sharing those insights with Jim, recommending alternatives, and then doing that for executives at a large scale level, exploring outcomes with new associates, advising them on customized development plans. So I think it's really just how you approach the work, and especially with the audience that you have. Every single listener on your podcast right now know that they have to cater everything to the audience. And that's really what I've done to be successful. So I think the key to my success in every one of those action kind of oriented examples is I have to be more curious than my client. And I know you and I have talked about it, but here's why. No matter how brilliant business leaders are and where we've taken our careers, we don't have all the answers. And I think that's such a given, but people don't say that too often. And take me, for example, I'll be vulnerable. If I look at the times in my own life where I didn't get it, in air quotes, there would be three probably predominant reasons. First off, I'm sometimes too close to the problem to see it. You know what I mean? I see a lot of trees and I don't realize I'm in the very forest I'm trying to trim or grow. And I need those outside eyes to help me see the problem clearer. And then secondly, it could be that I really haven't sharpened that saw lately and am trying to use dull, outdated methods, but still get the same sharp results. It just won't work. And I think lastly, and in my life especially, but I believe a lot of people can relate to this, it's probably the most common, I haven't looked in the mirror long enough to realize I am more the problem sometimes than I am the solution. And that takes a lot of vulnerability. So I'm sure there are other reasons why leaders seek out consultants, like myself or others. But like I said earlier, no matter the reason for being hired as a consultant, there's one thing for sure. You have to be more curious than they are, or else you're simply leading them down the wrong path or agreeing with them on everything and becoming then part of that proverbial problem. So curiosity as a word is a pretty dynamic concept. So I also want to break it down into one key behavior: asking more questions. As I was growing as a consultant, I found that solution when I really transitioned from a trainer to a consultant. As a trainer, I told, I shared, I prescribed, right? But as a consultant, I learned to be curious and explore possibilities with my very own client through the act of questioning. And I mean all the time, seeking to truly understand before being understood. And together then we built the solutions that made the most sense from both perspectives. So I guess my oversimplified approach is one I use in my life. I'm really curious, and therefore I ask a lot of questions to understand where I can possibly help either myself or someone else achieve that highest state that they want.
I love that. And the questioning piece, I think, is key. And as I'm thinking about the work that I've done in neurolinguistic programming, is that we have a process where it seems like a lot of questions, but really you are helping that individual get to a place where maybe they haven't asked themselves those questions,
Right.
and opens them up to new ideas or understanding about themselves, or just more potential solutions that they haven't discovered. Because you said sometimes we're our own worst enemy, and we have blocks we can't see.
Yeah. And one solution, if I could add on to your point, because it's so valid, it's a caution that I learned early. I taught myself not to say I'm truly seeking to understand, when in reality, I'm just using questions to prove my point or sell them on my approach. Like a good teacher, I also, have to check my answers and what I'm thinking, and not bring implicit bias to the table, so that when I sit down with the CEO and share what I've learned, she may sometimes be surprised to hear the perspectives I've gained. Does that make sense? I have to be true and honest with myself. Am I seeking to understand, or am I just waiting for them to catch up with my brilliance?
And that happens a lot. That second one, right? Where you're leading them with breadcrumbs, especially in sales conversations. But that's another podcast and for another time. But I like the genuine questions to help gather understanding, so that you can support them the way they need to be supported and offer up solutions. But then maybe they can have some self-awareness about the kinds of solutions or areas of opportunity that might exist that they haven't considered.
Right. Yeah.
So we are talking about high growth organizations that are either in the weeds of high growth, or are getting started, moving forward, where they're going to be growing rapidly. And this is one of your areas of specialization. So I really wanted to dive into this. So when we think about growth, one of the most challenging things that we do at as HR professionals is helping sort of manage and navigate all those things. We are playing a support and strategy role in those areas. What is your approach to this as an HR consultant for a high growth company?
Yeah, I think if I hear you asking, how do we as HR professionals help and spur more organizational growth and development? Is that a fair?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you remember from our last podcast where I defined organizational development in a very simple manner, like I try to do with everything, just so that the layperson can also understand our HR speak. To me, organizational development is developing the organization you work for as if it were an entity or a person or a human being. If I'm grooming a direct report or a mentee, for example, I want to know everything about them, what they're good at, where they stink, what they've tried to do or not tried in their own evolution. What are their hot buttons, their passions, their dreams, etc. And very similarly, I have to know the organization I work for really, really well. How they communicate or not, to what the highest growth target is, or how we make money, what keeps us from that goal, what furthers us along, how fast do we recover from failure, etc. And you know how I learn all of that? Again, I ask a lot of questions, as I mentioned earlier. During growth, asking questions can be a great driver and a great derailer. The driver's there because I'm grounded in the outcomes the organization wants, right? I'm getting information and I'm grounded with them. But it can be a derailer because time is often not on our side during growth. I often do tick, 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 tick. And if we were live, people would see me kind of pointing to my watch. I love the New York Minute, and even the New York Minute is too slow sometimes during growth. So as a consultant, I try to assess and analyze as I assemble. For instance, I'm currently looking for my next role, and I usually use this process not only during growth time, but also during my first 90 days in a new role. And, even the recruiting process, for instance, I will canvass C-suite peers and frontline associates to get the lay of the land on what's working, whether it's that or total rewards, learning and development, etc. And I'm in real time, I'm in the CEO's office as often as I can, be there for her, letting her know what I've learned so she can either validate or course correct me. So growth, we know, is vital and it's critical, but we sometimes may be so passionate about growth that we don't see that we've veered 5%, then 10, then 20, then 40, then 80, etc. And that asking questions on the fly as I'm trying to get grounded in what the CEO and my C-suite peers want is really how I've managed that as an HR professional for the firms I've played in.
I've often said that, like my team, for example, we have some courses that we're pre-selling right now in a couple different areas, and they are being pre-sold and we're creating them right now. And so I often say we are flying the plane while we're also building it at the same time. And that is really a place that you have to be really comfortable and confident in your team, so that if there's something that they're concerned about, they feel like they can come to you and express that, so that we can have a conversation to see if changes need to be made or adjustments need to be had, especially when you're trying to grow or scale really quickly.
Yes.
Let's take a little reset. This is Jessica Miller-Merrell, and you are listening to the Workology Podcast, and is powered by ACE the HR Exam and Upskill HR. We're talking with Claudio Diaz, Chief People Officer and Consultant. Comment podcast on my pinned post on Instagram and head on over to Workology blog. That's the Instagram account. Ask questions, leave comments, and make suggestions for future guests. I do want to hear from you. If you're listening to this podcast episode over on the Workology Podcast, the entire extended version, the hour-long conversation with Claudio, is available exclusively on the Workology Podcast Extended, which is available on Upskill HR. It's our professional development membership for HR leaders. You can head on over to upskillhr.com to sign up for a monthly or an annual subscription.
Let's talk a little bit about a subject that, and I'm a little embarrassed to say that we haven't talked about this topic enough here on the podcast, but that's revenue. How does HR go about helping to create new revenue for organizations?
Yeah, well, in my simple brain, the simplest answer is I do my job so well that it can actually be sold to others, right? If I run my HR processes so well that even paying clients, and maybe even competitors in the same industry, are begging you to teach them how you do it, there you start revenue streams. Let me give you an example, Jess. At Wipfli, I created a 2-year leadership academy that senior managers who attended would often brag about that experience to their clients while they were out in the field. Well, guess what? Some of those clients then called and asked me to do that within their own organization. In another situation, we created this compensation software solution with the help of IT that other accounting firms were actually interested in buying when we went to an alliance with other firms. So those are the ways that you can really generate the revenue, is do your job so well that others are saying, I want to be like you when I grow up. Now, that takes a while. And until you get that revenue stream working, in the meantime, while you get to be that star player, you can still do a lot to increase revenue and make yourself seem like the entrepreneurial expert that you are. I think first and foremost, it's my responsibility to teach HR professionals how our firm makes money. I hope your listeners don't discount what I just said because it's so simple. Too often, we in the C-suite in HR do not teach HR professionals who are well-versed in HR, may even have their SPHR and PHR certifications, yet they don't know how the company they work for actually makes money. They know what they sell, but they don't know how it makes money. So one of many simple tools that I use is a 4-quadrant client revenue graph. So the x-axis is the type of revenue that is coming in, whether that's new revenue and then annuity or year-over-year revenue. But on the y-axis are the clients, and they can either be new clients or existing clients. So you really end up with 4 quadrants. The bottom left quadrant is commonly called new, right? Because it's new revenue coming from new clients. That is where a lot of the bread and butter in the pipeline, the sales pipeline, comes from. The top left is new revenue from existing clients, or what's commonly called wallet share. What I mean by that is how much of the dollars in their budget are being used for our products and services versus our competitors. The bottom right quadrant is annuity revenue from new clients. And you can almost guarantee that early in the sales cycle through multi-year discounts and things like that. And it's that top line and quadrant is annuity revenue from your most loyal customers, what I call the coveted red carpet revenue. So when HR professionals see the revenue pipeline from those 4 perspectives, now they can bring another approach to helping our internal clients. And hopefully they bring solutions that make each quadrant grow year upon year. For new, for instance, we can teach business development skills or sales cycle skills, whether that's spin selling or snap selling, any of the different approaches. Or we can hire those who have proven to sell well in their past to increase sales and retention in our future, right? For wallet share, we can not only educate everybody about all the service lines that we have and the products that we offer, but we can help create bundling choices. Now, marketing probably is the leader in that, but you can actually do it as well. And you can design cross-lateral organizations that then capitalize on that vertical integration. Probably speaking way too geeky here, but I'm just trying to give examples. Needless to say, we can also create better compensation systems to reward increased wallet share, as well as, contract loyalty. Hey, you stay with us. Here's what we're going to do to thank you for being a loyal customer. And then smaller organizations that don't have a CRM or a tool to really track their customers well, I stand up in HR and I say, look, leverage my HRIS. You can identify what constitutes a loyal customer in the tools we have in the HRIS, and when we should roll out the red carpet to garner even more of that loyalty. So where I spend most of my time, I'm sorry that I'm long-winded, is in teaching leaders, including myself, to teach their own associates that they support how we make money and how their role can contribute to the top line. I think people who hear that feel like they have purpose in their role to what everybody always talks about, whether it's the top line revenue or the bottom line net profit.
Thank you for sharing all this. And as an entrepreneur myself, who also works in HR, there is nothing like having your own product or service that you throw your shingle out there and say, hey, this is available. A lot of my stuff is digital courses that are available on demand, but I have had to really get comfortable with looking at numbers, understanding the buying cycle, understanding things like CPCs, cost per click. How do I, as you were saying, roll out the red carpet for customers who are already happy with us? How can I grow that relationship in different ways? So these are all things that I would encourage all HR leaders to think about. And it can be at your organization. I would love for you to get involved in that, but it could be something as simple as setting up your own Etsy store, or driving for Uber, or just kind of thinking about and having that mindset, because I definitely know if I went back into corporate HR, my understanding of the business, and I have an MBA, would be so much greater. And I would be thinking about understanding how we make money and how HR can support that a lot differently than I did in my last corporate role.
Kudos to you. Yeah, absolutely. The entrepreneur side is what we really need to start thinking like in order to really be a seat at the table, to be at a seat at the table.
Absolutely. We have to start speaking the language of business in order to get that trust and have those conversations, because there's a lot of, in my mind, education that needs to happen because they have ideas about who we are as HR leaders or business leaders. And we need to change some perceptions. And that starts with being in those meetings and asking questions. But before all that, we need to have an understanding of the numbers behind the business.
Sure do. Agree with you.
So one of the things that I want to make sure we talked about, because we chatted about this, and one of the things I love about you, Claudio, is how you take a really complex topic and make it simple for anyone to understand. And I think that's a skill that is really important for anyone who's doing training and development. So let's talk about one that you mentioned in our prep call that I was intrigued about, which is the ABC model.
Organizational growth is a positive thing, but it does bring a lot of challenges. Everything from change management to organizational design to predictive metrics, forecasting, and more. HR leaders are really doing the most right now. Leadership skills, conflict resolution, scaling processes to align with company growth, reporting metrics to the executive suite and board, and keeping an entire shifting workforce in the loop with all these changes that comes with all this growth. I know it's a lot. As HR leaders, we aren't always prepared to handle high-level organizational growing pains, but we are often on the sidelines supporting and encouraging our teams, which is why I appreciate Claudio's insights on the podcast today. I believe it is our responsibility as HR experts, and that includes Claudio, to share why and what they know in places and spaces like this one. HR consulting is so much more than training. It's hand-holding, educating, communicating, structured learning systems, advising, counseling, and so much more. I really have learned so much from all these interviews from our HR consultants and just HR consultants in my own career. So I appreciate Claudio sharing his expertise with us on today's podcast episode. Go ahead and comment podcast on the pinned post on my Instagram account before we close things out here. It's at Workology Blog. You can ask questions, leave comments, and make suggestions for future guests. I really do want to hear from you. I appreciate you so much. And I thank you for joining the Workology Podcast, which is sponsored by ACE HR Examine Upskill HR. Know that the full entire hour-long podcast interview with Claudio on organizational growth and development is available exclusively for my Upskill HR members. We have over 100 hours of personal and professional development, resources, webinars, podcasts, all the things for you, all pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM recertification credits and those PDCs. Head on over to www.upskillhr.com to sign up and check it out. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who is tired of the status quo. I know that's you. My name's Jessica Miller-Merrell. Until next time, visit Workology.com to listen to all our previous Workology podcast episodes. Have a great day.